Hello, everyone. Pastor Ranger Dave here, and we're going to talk about Zion history. Now, I think history is really important. I have a degree in history from Thiel College, go Tomcats, and also I spent a little time interpreting history as a park ranger for the U.S. Park Service. So, I think history is really important. It shows us where we've been, what forms us, why things are the way they are, and we also keep in mind that we are part of history as we move forward. So, today's Zion history, very brief, kind of a compendium to this type of resource that you might find in our church library. And I'm just going to touch on some of the basics. So, 5 questions for you. Question number 1. The congregation of Zion Lutheran Church began in which year? A, 1703, B, 1803, C, 1903, or D, 2003? Your answer? Well, it is B, 1803. And what's the main point of that question and that answer? The main point is that when people came here and settled in this area, remember we are the first frontier, as you see bumper stickers around here saying, as they moved west, they brought things with them to survive. That would include all of their tools, all of their clothing, they brought food, and they brought their faith. So in 1803, after people were settling in this area, there's enough people that decided we need to be able to worship God together as Lutherans. And that's how Zion Lutheran Church, the congregation, was formed in 1803. All right, question number 2. Since 1803, how many church buildings has Zion had? A, 1, B, 2, C, 3, or D, 7? The answer is C, 3. Now, the thing I really want to start off by saying is that the church is not a building, but the church is a tool where people gather together and worship and learn and hear the word of God. So the congregation in its lifetime has had 3 different buildings, and also the church, as you see, and as I'll tell you here, the church constantly changes, and the building changes with the congregation to suit its needs. So the first church was built in Frankstown, because Hollidaysburg was not the first location where people settled. Frankstown is where people settled around here. But as the area grew, as the canal went out to Hollidaysburg, people moved here. So the first church was a 2-story log church built in the early 1800s. It was only 30 feet by 30 feet. That's less than half the dimension of a half-court basketball, or a half-court basketball court. So 30 feet by 30 feet. But then in 1839, as more people moved to Hollidaysburg, they built a church here. That is by our cemetery, which is by St. Michael's Catholic Church, or up the street from the Tiger Stadium, where our cemetery is today. And then later, 14 years later, in 1853, they tore down that log church that they had built in 1839 and built the one that we worship in today. And they used the materials from that church to build this one. The first worship service was on Christmas Day in 1853, and they had it where the office is right now. But then over 100 years later, in 1971, the education wing was built on, and that is where we have the basement, the fellowship hall, and the second floor. So each time the congregation needed more space or needed to have programmatic space, and so they built things on, like the education wing or a whole new church. And even in my time and in Ryan's time here as members and now as staff, the church has also changed. When we grew up here, did not have a theater room, and we didn't have an arts and crafts room. So the church continues to change to suit the needs of the people. Number 3. Beginning in 1849, sermons were preached entirely in this language. Is it A, English, B, Pig Latin, C, Swahili, or D, German? The answer is A, English. That's right, a new pastor was called to Zion in 1849, and he preached in English, and only in English. Before, the sermons had been preached in German. So the main point is that faith cannot grow if it's not fed. And so before 1849, when sermons were preached in German, people maybe were able to understand that. Maybe they were Germans, they knew the language. But as time went on and as people spoke more and more English throughout their daily lives, they no longer could understand the sermons, they no longer could understand what was happening in worship. So the service and the sermons changed to suit the people's needs. And I know that sounds simple, but I guarantee that people argued over this decision as they switched from German to English. In fact, I know of churches in other places that actually split in half because of this issue. All right, moving on. Number 4. On January 31st, 1866, ruffians from the town of Hollidaysburg committed this crime against the people of Zion. Is it A, arson, B, grand theft auto, C, vandalism, or D, poaching? The answer is B, grand theft auto. And I know what you're thinking. Say, Pastor Dave, the car wasn't even invented in 1866, but let me read you this excerpt from our history book. A register on January 31st, 1866 states, on Sabbath evening, a number of rowdies took several horses and sleighs, hitched at the Lutheran Church. In this place, while the owners were inside hearing the sermon, they drove around town at breakneck speed, and not satisfied with this, stole several valuable robes, 2 of them belonging to Mr. Albert Heilman of Frankstown. We hope no efforts will be spared to have these scoundrels punished. That's right. So in 1866, people from the town, probably some kids, stole the sleighs and the horses and took them for a joyride through town. Where the parsonage is, right next to the church, that is where we used to have our parking lot for horses and carriages and sleighs. So they took them for a joyride, returned them, and took a couple robes with them. So that's pretty interesting. Now, my main point is that we as the church exist in community. We've always been in the town of Hollidaysburg or Frankstown, and we've existed with the people around us. And we experience both the positives and the negatives. In fact, the community shapes who we are. And so we get to be a part of good things like parades, and we have afterburners, we hold vigils, we help people that are in fires and whatnot. Those are great things that we're able to do for the community and to be a part of the community. But it also comes with some negatives. Right now, sometimes you cannot get a space for the church parking in our parking lot during the week, even though there are spaces and people are very angry about that. And that's something that we are struggling against all the time. We have a memorial garden, and sometimes there's lots of trash and litter in there. These are small things, but they're the little negatives, too, of what it means to exist in community. Good things and negative things. All right, and last but not least, in the 218-year history of Zion Lutheran Church, we have been served by this many pastors. Is it A, 21, B, 107, C, 55, or D, 26? The answer is D, 26. That's right. In the 218 years that we have been together as a congregation, there have been 26 pastors and 1 deacon who is a layperson, somebody who's not ordained as a pastor but still has gone to seminary, to school, for word so that they can preach and also do service activities that have been here called to Zion Lutheran Church. Now, some of them have been run out of town because of gambling problems, which happened in the early 1800s. One of them died while fishing with his friend, drowned to death in the Juniata River in the late 1800s. And they've all shaped who we are as a congregation. They've led us, they've directed us, but it's also important to remember that pastors are not the whole of the church. The ministers of Zion Lutheran Church, and you see this in the back of the bulletin, have been thousands of people who have been here as members, who have participated faithfully in the life of the congregation. That includes you. That includes me. That includes everybody here from the past to the present into the future. We all are the ministers of this church, and we have participated in its history. Right now, you and I, we get to write the history as we make our decisions, as we go into the future. Because we are the church. You minister to people, and together we are the hands of Christ. All right, so that is a brief, and I mean a very brief overview of who we are as Zion Lutheran Church and a little piece of our history. There's a lot more, so if you ever have questions, I really nerd out about history. I'll be glad to talk to you about any of this stuff. And just remember that we are the church together. One final thing, I think I have time to do this. Our name, Zion Lutheran Church. What does Zion mean? Well, if you go way back in history, Zion means either the place of the city of Jerusalem, the city hill where the temple is built in Jerusalem, that is Zion, and also the temple itself. All of those places are where people meet God. And so here at Zion, we continue that tradition because we come together to help each other meet God. All right, that's all from Pastor Ranger Dave. I will see you next time.